Right, good morning everybody. I think it is, yes, well according to that clock it's gone 10:30. I think I said at the last meeting I thought that clock was fast, because I think it is still fast, because my watch says it's on 10:30 now. So, welcome everybody to this September meeting of Hampshire Fire and Rescue Authority. I will read the announcements. The openness of local government body regulations are enforced, giving a legal right to members of the public to record, film, photograph, or audio record and report on proceedings at meetings of the authority and its committees and or subcommittees. The authority has a protocol on filming, photographing and audio recording and reporting at public meetings to the authority, which is available on our website. And it's beholden upon me to advise you that meetings may be recorded and reported. And anyone who remains at this meeting will be deemed to have consented to the broadcast of their image and anything they say. Can I take the opportunity to remind you all, please, to disable your mobile phones, and also any iPad. I had a terrible occurrence at a Winchester meeting yesterday when this iPad is synced to this. My mobile phone, I couldn't switch it off, which was incredibly difficult. Oh, excuse me.
Here's what I found.
Hopefully I've done that now. Right, so you all got your agendas before you, so moving to the agenda, apologies for absence. I've had Jason Fazackerley on the telephone to me this morning. He was, I believe, one of the reasons for considerable problem on the motorway, because he was broken down on the motorway. He's subsequently advised me that he has been recovered, but the recovery has taken him back to Portsmouth. It couldn't take him here because his car would have been stuck here, I suppose. So anyway, he's unable to join us, so he is apologies. Also, apologies, we'll take apologies from Jeff Hockley, who, as many of you will know, is not in the best of health. So I think the rest of us are here. Any other apologies? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Right, item 2, declarations of interest. I will read that out to enable members to disclose to the meeting any disclosable pecuniary interest they may have in any matter on the agenda for the meeting, where that interest is not already entered into the authority's register of interests, and any other pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest in any such matter that members may wish to disclose. Well, members, I know you're all very much aware of that, but if anything else comes up during the meeting that you feel that you have an interest in, well, please interrupt me and register that interest. Okay. Item 3, minutes of the meeting that was held on the 17th of July. So referring to page 5 of your agenda, we'll just take those for accuracy. Page 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Are you content that is a true record of our meeting on that day? Everybody happy? Right. I don't think, I can't see any matters arise. Anybody got any comment from those minutes? I'm not aware of any matters. Neil, is there anything? Nothing there? Right, so I'll sign those minutes. No, I'm signing these minutes. Good, thank you. So, just going back to my notes, I welcomed you all here. We don't have Tig with us. Have we had apologies from Tig Outlaw?
He wouldn't normally apologise, Chairman, I think, because he's not a member of the authority, but I know he comes here when he can.
Okay. Well, there was a big football match at Fratton Park last night, and I know he's a season ticket holder, and Portsmouth lost 4-0, so maybe he's recovering from that. I think it probably was. I don't know, but it was broadcast. I'm sure, as it was a local derby. They were playing Southampton, so I'm sure it was televised on Sky. Right, moving on to your agenda then. Oh, can you all hear me? I'm always saying about moving this microphone. You can all hear okay. Yes, thank you. Deputations. I don't think we have any. No deputations. Chairman's announcements. Just a few things to tell you about. First of all, our new whole-time firefighter trainees are nearing the end of their 16-week training programme. Their graduation ceremony is scheduled for Friday, 11th of October, here at Eastleigh, and this will run from 9:30 until 1400. I did mention this to you earlier this morning, and I will be here as your chairman, but hopefully as many of you as possible can also attend that event. I've mentioned that whole time. I thought this was going to be retained as well. Is it?
No, this time it's just the whole time.
Ah, right. Okay, I stand corrected there. So it is just whole-time firefighters. Is there going to be a separate event for retained?
What we plan to do is have an annual event for the RDS as well as whole time at some point.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Right. Very important announcement here. Jeff Housekeeping. Is Jeff here? No, he isn't. Has recently announced his decision to leave Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service across a phased period of retirement. Jeff will continue to lead the work on delivering the new combined fire authority, that's combined with the Isle of Wight, and will take early retirement in May 2020. I would like to take this opportunity to record my thanks to Jeff for all that he's done, all the hard work he's done across many years of service for Hampshire. I'm not saying an awful lot there, and I hope at a later date there'll be opportunity for me to say a fair bit more, because Jeff has contributed considerably to what we've achieved over the last few years. You wish to add something there?
Just that very point, actually, Chairman. So equally, my thanks extend to Jeff, and when he is able to attend a future Fire Authority meeting, we'll arrange, obviously, an appropriate send-off for him. But I'm grateful for him and the notice period we've got, so we can actually put things in place over the coming important, crucial dates for the Combined Fire Authority progress. That's really important to us, so that's very useful.
Thank you. Interestingly here, guests from Saudi Arabia's civil defence are here today visiting our fire headquarters. I don't think they're too far away from us, actually. And this, in fact, they might be in the room next door. The visit will enable the organisation to better understand, that's them, Saudi Arabia, better understand UK Fire and Rescue Service, and we're proud to facilitate this activity. You're going to add something. Are we going to be able to meet with them, or perhaps not? But anyway, if you'd like to add.
So, it's testament perhaps to our organisation that we are highlighted globally as an organisation that is worthy of visit from guests such as from Saudi Arabia. My thanks to Shantha for her connections in her networks to offer our space for them to come and see. Certainly, and Shantha's already done a presentation to them on our arrangements here. They were considering coming into the Fire Authority to observe the entire meeting. Instead, they've decided we'll do some other sort of elements of what we do, how we're governed. But it's part of a broader UK-Saudi kind of relationship that we're trying to complement and add to. But again, it goes back to the idea that the Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service is well thought of globally, and we are kind of a point of visit, a choice of visit for people like that. Thank you.
Right, thank you for that. Now, also, Shantha, I've been made aware just this morning that you have a national appointment now, but I'm sorry to say I don't know exactly what it is. So, in congratulating you on that, could you just briefly tell us what it is?
Thank you, Chairman. So I'm very closely involved with the Fire Executive Leadership Programme, which is the programme which our officers of all backgrounds go on to ready them for strategic roles. And the National Fire Chiefs Council has been running that for many years in conjunction with Warwick University, and several of our officers are indeed alumni of that very programme. So I'm involved closely in the running of that.
Well, thank you for that, Shantha. That, yes, indeed. That indeed recognises your expertise and commitment to the fire service. So well done for that, and we look forward to hearing more about it in due course. Thank you. Moving on, this week I'm sure you will all be aware that this is National Inclusion Week, and Hampshire Fire Service has been supporting that with events taking place across the county. These have included menopause awareness training, tackling stigma in football, mental health awareness. Ridian has volunteered to go to a men's health session in Basingstoke tomorrow. And more importantly, I will be representing the authority as your chairman at the launch of Black History Month at St Mary's Fire Station tomorrow morning. I was there in a similar role last year, and it was quite an iconic event, it really was, and I'm quite sure tomorrow's event will be something similar. And indeed, if any of you wish to join me down at St Mary's, I appreciate it's somewhat short notice, but if you wish to join me with that, you'd be very welcome. I think that's all I've got to say on Chairman's announcements. So we move on to member development, and within the context of member development, we have details of LGA training that's available to us, and I've just asked the Chief Officer to come in because we've noticed on the website there's LGA training, it says in Hampshire in November, but we didn't know about it, so is that here?
Well, that's very exciting, Chairman. I didn't know about that either. So, we'll discover that it may be in Hampshire somewhere, maybe here, but of course we do allow our premises to be used occasionally for those sorts of events. But just to say, we'll spend more time, obviously, at our away day just to discuss through what's available via the LGA and indeed other places, so that the authority can get access to those really valuable sessions, enable you to do your roles as best as you can, and enable us as a service to benefit from those roles.
Right, thank you for that. We would like to find out about that. I mean, that's on the 26th of November, and as it says it's in Hampshire, I think we all feel that a goodly number of us should be present at that. A bit sad if none of us were there, and it's in Hampshire. So can we follow that up and find out about that? And what I'd like is that the authority is advised about that as soon as possible. The away day is next Tuesday, and we will discuss that there would appear hitherto the LGA training seem to be just something at Warwick University, and we've sent a number of members in the past to that. But there are lots of other training opportunities now, and I would want you all to benefit from those if you are available, and it's something that you would had the time to go on. So we will discuss that further on Tuesday. So anybody else? Roger, you want? No. Who was going to? Who was asking?
Right. Couple of points. One is that I think it's about a year ago now, I was appointed by the Fire Service Management Committee to the National Fire Chiefs Council's People's Engagement Forum. Now, it's quite interesting in the sense that the first meeting was actually held on the 24th of July this year. So it was a long time from appointment to actually having a meeting. The papers which were sent out, unfortunately, were the wrong papers, but it was all to do with apprenticeships. And within that, they're drawing up terms of how apprenticeships can be run and guidelines to authorities on apprenticeships. So that was quite interesting. The other main part of the meeting was setting up what the future of it's going to be, how it's going to be run, terms of reference, etc., etc. So I'm sure the chief was much aware of the paperwork coming out from it on apprenticeships, and which will affect us here. As I said, the paperwork that was sent out was the wrong paperwork, but from my personal point of view, was very interesting, because it was about, if I can get to the right page, involvement of planning authorities or fire authorities being involved within planning. Now, the chiefs have agreed that the planning authorities should not be involved. Now, I personally disagree with that, and we, I think, have always had a policy here that we should try and encourage the planning authorities to send plans into the service, and we've tried to get the changes nationally through the relevant paperwork. So I'm very concerned that the national chiefs are looking at it in a totally different way. The person who actually wrote the report I've had a discussion with, and what they're saying is that they don't want to have an involvement in planning at the early stage, because the way that legislation is being written through building regs and other processes, they can be involved at a later stage and therefore can stop buildings being used which are unfit for use. But I still personally believe that it would be better to be involved at the very early stage, so that one doesn't get a building built and then one has to stop it being used, which is, I believe, we've heard before from Sharon that has actually happened in Southampton. Yeah. So I disagree with the NFCC's view on this. I've told them I don't agree, but I guess we wanted to highlight it to yourselves, is that it appears they have a differing view to us. So
right, thank you for that,
Roger. That one on the NFCCC. Yeah. The other attendance I've actually made was to the LGA Fire Conference last week, and Ros was also there. The meeting was a total change to what has been done in the past. So, Chairman, as you will know from previous experiences of attending, is that it's always been rows of seats, and we've gone through all of the reports and what have you on the agenda, been able to question them, to make comments about them. But the setup was tables and 6-8 people round a table with just making ideas of comments and discussion groups. And that meant that four important items, in my opinion, were not even discussed, raised, or whatever. It was just the meeting was cut at about 1:20, and the item on the workforce update, Fire Commission update paper, National Fire Chiefs Council update, Building Safety update, None of that was discussed at all. And I think that, in my opinion, it was the wrong way. There's some very important issues and points within those papers which should have had a discussion on and been able to challenge and question the officers who wrote them. So we only dealt with basically 3 items. One was the Fire Standards Board. Then we had, I think, the same report that you had on the Monday about the from the Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue. And then we had an inclusion strategy and a Fire Commission and Fire Service Management Committee priorities. And that was really quite well skipped over, I think, from my memory of it. So it was, in my opinion, not a good meeting. But I think it needs to be well attended, reported to here, because that's what this item is about. So, but if members want to go into it in greater depth, I'm quite happy to deal with it at APAC.
I think it's appropriate that we can do that. We can talk about it next week at our training session, probably.
On Saturday, I went to the Hartley Wintney Fire Station Open Day, which was terrific. A brilliant atmosphere, very active on the station.
Sorry, which station?
Hartley Wintney.
Hartley Wintney.
Exciting. Both appliances rushed off to go and fight a fire at Blackbush. Nearly killed me in the rush. And it was excellent, excellent. I took my wife along, and she made the comment just how really appreciative the station staff seemed to be that we turned up. David was there, that we turned up. I mean, it really was great, great. I'm also representing you on Friday at the Hampshire and Isle of Wight local government.
You are.
With Stu.
Good. Thank you for that, William. So, who was next?
Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, on that, Hartley Wintney was supported by Whitchurch, who had come up, and in fact, both appliances were sent out. The Whitchurch one and the Hartley Wintney one. Jonathan was there as well, and it was a fabulous day. But then it always is in Hartley Wintney. It's very well supported. A couple of weeks before that, Yateley had a charity car wash event, raised over £1,000. Again, very well supported. Both of those are retained stations, as you know, and just over a year, nearly 2 years ago, January 2018, yes, it's nearly 2 years, you called me and asked me to be the RDS champion. I started working with Stu, and we were looking at various things, and since then, an on-call project team has been set up, and I visited a lot of stations, and we had lots of ideas coming in on how to improve things. The chief approved some of the things that we've been doing, and Brian Needs, Group Manager Neat, we took it down from about 150 suggestions to the 10, well actually the 9 originally, but eventually 10 most popular ones that we could do. We're now doing and putting into effect a number of changes on RDS. So we're going to enable cover at other on-call stations when crewing deficiencies are identified. The trial's going to take place in Hart and East Hanson North groups on that. So we're going to have more availability at strategic stations and improved response times. We're going to look at riding with no initial commander. Now, I may need to explain that. Where there is an existing fire and you've already got a commander in charge, but you need a second appliance, we weren't sending appliances if you didn't have a suitably qualified person to go with that second appliance. We're now saying, quite rightly, and this came up very early in my discussions with people, that the second appliance can go because you've already got somebody in command on site anyway. So that will give the trial stations on that are Basingstoke, Yateley and Hamble. So we're going to again see better availability and more call out going, which is brilliant. We're increasing the resource pool for special appliance mobilisation. We're also changing the training that is happening so that we can do more online rather than spending so much time down here in service headquarters. Because, of course, when people are giving up their free time, their holiday time, because they're working, so they have to take holiday time to come here. So the less they need to come here, the better it is for the retained. We're seeing results. We've got better retention at the moment. The figures are changing. We've got better recruitment coming in. So it's before if we were down here at the bottom, we're beginning to bubble up, and things are changing. It's really quite exciting. Some of the things the team are doing, and they're doing a great job. Before you interrupt me, we're doing a standby relief strategy where we've got on-call firefighters from neighbouring stations may cover a different one where we wouldn't have that one online. Trial stations, and this is why I wanted to bring it up because the councillors would want to know. Winchester and Test Valley Group, Sutton, Scotney, Stockbridge, Winchester, Kings Clear and Overton in the north, New Forest Group, it's going to be Hardley, Hythe, Burley, Lyndhurst, Brockenhurst. They're all, lots of things are happening, and it's all quite exciting. I don't know whether Stu's got more to say on that, but we are doing a lot to make things better.
Right. Well, thank you for that, David, which demonstrates that you're fulfilling the role that I appointed you to. And I'm pleased that at the end there you mentioned the New Forest, because we have had some issues very recently down in the New Forest with stations could not be deployed to a fire, and that was dealt with by Southampton full-time stations. What you're essentially talking about there is operational issues, which is what our officers deal with. So I'll just ask the Chief if he wants to comment upon what you've just said.
No, and thank you for your leadership in that space. And I know that we're grateful for bringing it to the surface. Some of these challenges are community challenges, in as much as people being available for our fire stations and for all those people involved in driving their availability and success. I'm really grateful for. I know that Stu looks very carefully at the numbers. We're looking at those at end of year and reporting back to you on performance against availability and other things. So it's something which we're critically looking at, but it remains a stubbornly difficult national problem as well. So I'm grateful.
Mr. Chairman, the leadership is very definitely from Neil, Stu and the other officers on the project team. They're the ones that are running with it. All I'm doing is highlighting the issues.
I think that's what I said. You're fulfilling the role that I appointed you to. So, yes, thank you for that. Sharon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the end of July, Friday the 26th, I attended the HFRS Princess Trust final presentation in Southampton again. Yes, you were. Lovely afternoon, as always. If you haven't been before to one of these presentations, it really is worthwhile. It's a great afternoon. Watching those young people who've overcome quite a lot of challenges, succeeding.
Thank you for reminding me of that, Sharon. They're very emotive occasions. Then we, at the same time, I don't know whether you went to, was it the Basingstoke? Were you were there also, probably, really. Yes. It's worth acknowledging at this time the commitment from our staff to those facilitating those events. And in fact, the event that we had in Southampton was a combined event that included Gosport as well, and that in itself presented not exactly difficulties, but it was something additional that had to be dealt with. They had to arrange transport to get Gosport people up to Southampton, and these things all have to be arranged and take time. And from what I could see, we have some really first-class volunteers dealing with those issues. And some of the candidates there, really, they really do benefit from that engagement and meeting others and discussing it. And it's something that I hope the fire service can continue to support. Right, okay. Anybody got anything else? that they wish to say. Just to reiterate, we will be talking about LGA training next week. I know some of you won't be able to be at that because of other things happening, but hopefully you will be aware and input to us where you would like to take part in that training. Okay, nobody got any other comments on item 6, so we move on now to the main substantive part of our agenda. So we're on to item 7, Ocado fire, which occurred in February this year. So please turn to page 11 on your agenda, and I will ask Shantha to present her report, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the third time that the Fire Authority have spoken and discussed the events that took place, the first being the Chief Fire Officer's request that you would allocate funding to a learning review, the second being the report that I brought in July on the contributory factors to help gain a better understanding, and also reaffirming the sprinkler position statement. And then this report, I will shortly show a presentation which accompanies it, which pulls together our experience of that event. So I'm just going to go straight to the presentation. Just bear with us one moment while we get it up on the screen.
Oh, that's up on the screen, is it?
Yes, it is.
We'll move so we can view the screen.
So this presentation, what I'll be doing is giving you an overview of our contact and history, and I suppose the context setting of the business itself, of Ocado. Also, I will be talking a little bit about the operational activities on day 1 and day 2. Obviously, this was a 4-day incident we were in attendance for, and then I will talk again about the strategic learning that we've taken from it. I will aim to keep to about 20 minutes. I know we have a packed agenda, and also, of course, what I'm trying to do is highlight the most pertinent issues, because there was an extremely significant amount of learning that has come out. So this was a fire that we couldn't find, in the sense that due to the technology and the way the fire occurred, it was deep-seated and extremely difficult, dare I say impossible, for our firefighters to get to. As you know, this was one of the largest, most prolonged and complex incidents that Hampshire's dealt with in our recent history. And as I said, I'll talk a little bit about the timeline, the lessons identified. Wrong button. There we go. So the incident review, you will be familiar with that there were 4 very clear objectives. Any failings of Ocado in their duties under the fire safety order, any failings of duty by Hampshire Fire and Rescue and our partners that may be considered as negligent, and the strategic, tactical and operational learning that can be gained for service and national use. And then the other aspect, which I was asked to look at, was a technical assessment of the building construction, the causes of the fire and its growth, including to what extent these 2 factors interrelated. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to be able to cover all of this in this period of time, because there's a tremendous amount of detail behind it. I'll be highlighting the most important aspects of that. So talking a little bit about what our organisational knowledge of the site was and its history. The warehouse itself was built in 1993 for W.H. Smith's and was later occupied by Office Depot. And at that time, it was one of the largest high bay warehouses in the UK. Ocado acquired the warehouse facility in 2015 and proceeded to convert and extend it using an approved inspector, and there were a number of different fire engineering solutions that were put in place. So something called, which you may have heard of, called a very early smoke detection apparatus, VESDA system, a sprinkler system, which we've discussed before, was specified by the insurer. In terms of the sprinkler system, it was significant in size. There were over 6,700 sprinkler heads and 2 425 cubic metre tanks, so a tremendous amount of water. And the bit that makes this site particularly interesting and indeed unprecedented in terms of the technology was the level of automation within the building, which was based on the concept of vertical picking. So we had a tremendous amount to do with Ocado and that site prior to the event and over a number of different years. So moving on now to the layout, which I think you'll find particularly interesting, of the building. So really what I want to show here is give you a sense of the size and scale of the building. It was a building within a building, which is why it was so difficult to find and identify that fire. So those two grids, each of them, or the larger one, is approximately 80 metres wide by 120 metres long and 6 metres high. Numbers are difficult, so to put that into some kind of context, it has the same storage volume as approximately 500 double-decker buses, so very, very significant. Each of those columns is split into columns consisting of 17 totes, so that those plastic containers which have products that you find at any supermarket. There's no necessary rhyme or reason as to what you'd find in them. It's just depending on the demand and what's needed at that time. So for example, we know within the column where the fire started, there were items such as champagne, baby nappies, fire kindling, so a real host of things within the ambient grid. The columns of totes are self-supporting, and the grid, the way it's set up, is designed to bear the weight of the robots that are circulating on the top and prevent lateral movement. In terms of the weight of each of those columns, that's 600 kilos. So the weight is distributed and transferred down through the totes, and the grid system is replicated on the chilled side of the grid, though the dimensions are slightly smaller. And what you see is an infrastructure that humans are not supposed to be in at all. There is no way humans could safely access those grids. And what's replicated on the chilled side is slightly smaller. The red line on there is a wall which was installed as to the requirements of the insurance specification, and that was specified to provide 60-minute fire protection. So that gives you a sense of the building. So what I want to do now is just talk a little bit about how the fire started. I'll touch over it because I know that you're familiar on it, but you know that it started as a very small fire. On the night of the 5th of February, it was a normal shift. There were about 120 people on site, all conducting business as usual. The robots worked for about 4 hours before connecting to a charging dock for a 20-minute cycle. And then at about just before 2 a.m., a small fire ignited on the top of a specific robot caused by the arcing in the charging sequence. And this fire developed over the next half an hour, and it then spread to another robot, and at that point the robots were stopped moving, so by an automatic cue. It's seen by the engineer, and at that point the alarm is raised. My team, who reviewed this, believe they've analysed everything, and at this stage, because it was a small fire, because there was a clean nature of the burn, because of the proximity of the VESDA that I spoke about earlier, the early detection system, and the high volumetric nature of the warehouse, that's possibly why the fire wasn't detected at that point. And that's obviously something that Ocado have been looking into. And as you know, we have been in discussions with them and gaining information from them throughout the duration of the review. In terms of our response, it was a standard, despite the unprecedented nature of the technology with it, it was a standard fire commercial industrial classification, and we were on scene within 6 minutes, and all resources that had been sent were in place within 30 minutes. So then moving on to the what we found when we were on scene. So the first appliance arrived just before 3 o'clock, and the IC there is starting to get a sense of the situation and how they might attack that fire. And at this point, the history of the fire, including the deactivation of the sprinkler system, wasn't disclosed. So there was a first impressions message sent slightly later on, and we undertake our normal procedures in terms of sending a breathing apparatus team into recce to reconnoitre the conditions and to report back. At all times we have access to the Ocado CCTV, so as you can see from these images, we're trying to establish as rich a picture as we can from the fire. The other thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about is I have mentioned in previous Fire Authority meetings that over those 4 days we used every tactic that Hampshire Fire and Rescue has at its disposal, and indeed resources from other fire and rescue services, the example being the extended aerial ladder platforms from other fire and rescue services, and indeed the drone that we gratefully received for a period from Kent Fire and Rescue Service. So this is an example, positive pressure ventilation to, as the conditions deteriorate, to consider what other things we can use. PPV is normally a very effective tactic to use, but in this case, because of you're relying on knowing where all the different doors and openings are and that they're closed, some had been open, so it meant the positive pressure, air pressure within the building was lost and never regained. So sadly, we weren't able to move on using that tactic. So later on in the early hours of the morning, again, we're constantly sending informatives back, which is our normal operating procedures, to our fire control so they can start thinking about the different resources that we might need and start thinking ahead. So again, this is what one of my team built, so it helps you understand the layout of the building, and I'm going to talk in a little bit about some of the activity that we conducted on the roof as well as another tactic. So water supplies, I've spoken about the sprinklers in terms of the size and scale of them, and what we have had access to is a significant amount of data to help understand the effectiveness of those sprinklers and the activity that took place. What became clear quite early on that at about 5:45, pretty much the water supplies were exhausted, and it was a issue of, I suppose, criticality for us, a strategic issue in terms of how we're going to identify future water supplies for resolving this incident. So yeah, we had, I think, 9 water carriers that we used within the incident. Water was a constant theme that had strategic significance for all of the commanders throughout the duration. So speaking a little bit about sectorisation, so that's simply how we divide up an incident that we were at. This, I can't emphasise enough the scale of this incident and how it stretched us as a well-resourced fire and rescue service. So we had 6 sectors plus a USAR sector. So you have sector 1 looking at the front of the building, 2 down the side of the building, 3 to the rear, 4 accessing through 1, and then 5 was established on day 2, and that was focused on defending the ammonia. I'll talk about the ammonia in a little while. And then a couple more as well. So complex, lots of sectors, a big span of control in terms of our various commanders on the ground. And of course, as I've mentioned, and you will be aware, it wasn't just Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service resolving this. Early on, our resource requirements for specific capabilities went well beyond our resourcing. So in total, there were 7 fire and rescue services involved. On day 1, ultimately, our resources grew to about 20 fire appliances, 9 water carriers, 5 aerial ladder platforms, a drone I mentioned, and a host of other different assets. So again, it stretched the service. It also placed a strain on the region as a whole, because the fire and rescue services that were supplying us weren't just supplying us as a one-off. There were some that were supplying us with people on a rotational basis, and indeed other fire and rescue services that are smaller than Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service. And of course, this became a multi-agency operation. We were supported by the police, by SCAS, and absolutely I have to pay tribute to the rapid response team in terms of the catering they produced. Of the, I think, 80 to 90 hours we were on scene, they were there for about 55. So, you know, that was absolutely critical in terms of maintaining morale of our people, etc. So on day one, it felt like we were making good progress. We were fighting the fire within the grid, despite the fact it was inaccessible to humans. Crews were creating holes and openings in an attempt to attack the fire. And at a certain point, when it had been, and the fire in the grid had been burning for about 12 hours, we developed a strategy using our urban search and rescue and specialist technical response crews to ventilate the roof structure. So at that point, we were almost, through working on the roof, mimicking the vertical picking that sort of took place in the operation of the warehouse. And at this stage, it felt like good progress was being made. So I'm just going to skip through and just give some pictures of what was happening. So we moved on to the roof, and this becomes critical. So why did we go onto the roof? Well, there were three purposes to that. Where was the fire? We needed to find that out. We needed to ventilate the building, and we needed another way to attack the fire and to put it out. So we had, as you would expect, a whole host of different control measures in place to protect the people that were working on there, in terms of a safety observer, a dedicated escape platform in the form of one of our ALPs, a whole host of work restraint systems, and a way-safe cable, which is an illuminated cable. So what those control measures did, combined with those tactics, was allow us to make a direct attack onto the fire. And it did appear for a time that conditions were stable, and there was a belief that progress was being made and the plan was effective. Then there was a change in roof conditions at around 10 o'clock on that first day. And what I am going to show you now is how those conditions changed, and their volume and nature of the smoke in the void beneath changed significantly, which meant that the people on the roof had to evacuate quickly. So what I'm going to do, if it works, is show you a redacted version. There will be some silences in there. The reason there are silences in there is there's some colourful language used because people are, in a controlled fashion, exiting there. And I hope that sort of conveys what was
Yeah, fire's breaking out down here. Sorry, up here. It's romping. We might have to start that evacuation. Lads!
John, you receive it?
Yeah, go.
Ranger said it's burning right above or just beneath where you are in the cage. Over.
Right, stand by. Right, lads! Listen in! It's burning right underneath us! Yeah. Yep! Yeah, I can see it. Let's get it off then! Right, you lot! Off! Come on! General evacuation, mate. Everyone off the roof. Undo that. Just take your time, mate. Take your time. Get off the roof. Get everyone cut ALP. Are we all off? Quick. Keep coming. Anybody got a whistle? Right, lads, lasses, come on, listen to me. Need you to keep calm.
John, you got too many in the cage.
Walk up there and go over and start your way down. Yeah. Take your time. I can't move with as many people. I haven't got.
So that gives a sense of the sense of urgency and immediate risk to our firefighters who were working on the roof at that time. Due to the decisions that were taken, the leadership of the safety observer, the ALP cage operator, and the the actions of our well-trained crews, everyone got off there safely. It then required a full evacuation of about 200 people. That was the roll call of the incident ground. So at that point, there was a major incident declared, and at a later point, our crews did return to the sectors. So it was a sudden and unexpected escalation, and when we did return to the sectors, we had a more defensive approach because this was a new risk which had been unexpected. So moving on then so we've got quite a few pictures which give you a sense. So moving on to day 2. So day 2 was in complete contrast to day 1. Still a tremendous resource requirement, a specialist capability. The need, as this is now a major incident, to invoke broader multi-agency emergency response arrangements, and also a new risk that was emerging that I alluded to earlier around the ammonia, which was at the front of the building, and potentially a catastrophic risk on the immediate and local area, the residential area, the businesses, that obviously of the presence of hazardous areas. So there was a more defensive strategy that was taken, and we were focused entirely on defending those ammonia tanks and also how we would decant the hazardous materials within the ammonia tanks. So at a certain point, it became clear that the progress around this tremendously large building of the fire had developed very rapidly, and at that point a second major incident was declared, and we had to get people out of the area. And I'm not talking about our own emergency response crews, as I said, we're talking about local businesses, the housing estate that's quite close, and really thanks to the joint and well-practiced planning and exercising of the local resilience forum, that all happened very smoothly. Also, Ocado were very helpful in terms of facilitating accommodation for those people that had been disturbed. Eventually, we did return to the fire ground following the evacuation, and we were able to start decanting the ammonia, and that took place over a period of hours. And the fire at that point the fire development had slowed down. So that was, as you can see, our whole focus from a very offensive, we're going to extinguish this, to now how we're going to manage this risk and continue to protect the public had changed. So day 3, you start to see a return to a new normality in terms of the major incident being stood down, residents being allowed to go back to their properties, a sense of routine. It's very clear at this point that the building is completely lost, and we're planning to return to a new normality. So day 4, so that was the 8th of February, we issued a stop message early in the morning, and we remained on scene for a number of hours to do our normal sort of close down procedures. So that was very operationally focused, but I felt it was important to give you a sense of that, to understand the impact that it had on that service for those few days, and of course subsequently as well. This slide just shows a little bit about how far and wide the support from other services was. I've mentioned a couple of times already the strain it placed on our fire and rescue service, and quite clearly there was an impact on the fire and rescue service within the region, and also a number of different organisations involved. Without the support we received through the incident and subsequently the review investigations, we wouldn't have been as efficient as we could have been. In terms of the review, what it's actually looked like, there's been about 8,000 hours of CCT footage, over 100 hours of debriefing sessions of individual commanders and crews, and others from outside of the organisation. So that just gives you a bit of a flavour. Moving on to the learning from the incident itself. As something around our behaviours when we go into an incident, we expect that it is going to be a successful outcome. So for us to lose a building, whilst we can say it was a success in terms of how the situation changed and we continue to protect the public, ultimately that building was a loss for a whole variety of reasons. That building was a building within a building due to the technology, And as I've shown you in that one example, and there were other examples through those 4 days of what happened on the roof and the control measures that we implemented and the decisions made by our staff had a positive outcome in terms of protecting our firefighters and the other emergency services staff on scene. Talking a little bit about the strategic lessons that have emerged so far. So the report, in the internal report, looking at the operational side of things, has produced a tremendous amount of learning, which we're feeding into the service, into our policy, into our practice. And my role going forward as Director of Performance and Assurance, I'll be looking for that assurance to make sure that things are changing as a result. But in terms of what we're feeding out nationally, so there's sort of 3 key messages that I'd like to leave you with. The first is around the technology within the building, new and emerging. You know, that is Ocado's proprietary technology, and how that butted up against the firefighting tactics that we, as an innovative fire and rescue service using the 21st century, is different. So it asks questions about how firefighting may develop in the future as more technology like this develops and is implemented, within buildings. A second one, again, I've mentioned this a few times, is around the scale and extended duration of the incident. Now, I would like to point out that over the 4 days, our focus was on this incident, but actually we had a number of other significant incidents going on. We had at least one fire domestic. So we were able, despite this, to continue to protect the public of Hampshire as well, but it did put a stress and a strain on us. And finally, there's obviously a tremendous amount of discussion now around building regulations. Perhaps there is something about how fire rescue authorities are cited earlier on in planning and significant planning changes and broadening in that possibly. Going back to the kind of the 4 areas that I looked at, they're contained within the report in terms of what our overall findings were. Ocado, their actions contributed possibly to the development of the fire, but what has been come out in discussions between ourselves, the review team and Ocado, is their commitment to understand the technologies that they use and commit to further research and development to prevent this happening for them in the future. For us and our partners, I think that my team have concluded from all their analysis that the outcome couldn't have been any different. We did everything we could as a multi-agency response to ensure that people were protected and to return to a new normality. Significant learning has been shared. I was only speaking at the Emergency Services Show last week on this topic, and there's a real interest from national operational guidance and learning in terms of this, and finally the building behaviour as well. So that concludes it, and I'm happy to take any questions that anyone may have on the presentation. Thank you.
Shantha, can I first of all thank you for a very comprehensive report there, summarising what happened back in February. I will bring the Chief in just in a moment, but first of all I think I would wish to reiterate what I said some months back now, to congratulate our teams on all that they achieved on that momentous occasion over 4 days. And indeed all the other fire services and organisations that were supporting us on that. It was very interesting, that slide that you put up there, the scale of the operation and the number of organisations involved in supporting Hampshire. So I would wish to publicly thank everybody and congratulate everybody for their commitment on that day. 4 days. So I'll just bring in the Chief here and then we'll take questions.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Shantha. And a really wide thanks to Shantha and her team for the depth of investigation they carried out there. Clearly, these incidents are dramatic and impacting for the communities around them, indeed for the whole of the region, as Shantha suggested. But they have reverberations through the years as well, and they need to have reverberations through the years because many times in the past we've seen large fires occur across the country and very little learning has occurred from them, not only in the systems which lead to that building being built, but also in the firefighting operations that take place. And I think we know this, we've talked about this enough, I think, but just to reiterate, that building, or buildings like this, rely on the early stage design concept right back in the years before it was even built, right through to the actual building quality and construction quality, right through to the regulation around that construction quality and the checking that needs to go into making sure buildings are built well. And then the occupation is used as it was intended, and the companies that occupy them using it well. It relies on maintaining that building and its occupants to make sure they continue to be enforced. Sometimes that's a fire service, sometimes that's other people. And then when a fire occurs, making sure the systems that have been built to protect those occupants and the building itself work and are left protected. Then at the end of all of that, you have the fire and rescue service, trying to do what it can. That's a fire alarm test. We've got to mention that bit. The fire service will do what it can in the remaining controls that have failed to deal with the fire or incident it faces. And that could be right from a road traffic accident to a major fire of this nature. So I think what we continue to do, and I know the fire authority is behind us on this, is to try and work on all those things upstream from the fire occurring to make sure they're much more effective than they have been. If you go right back to the fire, London was caused by a lack of building construction, lack of forethought in terms of the construction that occurred in those days, a very long time ago. The danger is if we continue down this road of deregulation, the danger is to end up in the same place again. So these buildings need to be designed well, they need to be maintained well. I'm hugely grateful to Ocado for their assistance in this. They have a great deal to learn. We've got a great deal to learn as a sector also. And I think that's been done in a very grown-up and pragmatic way, which allows us to really look at how we keep our communities safe, but as well as, and really important to me, is to keep my firefighters safe. You saw the urgency in which they left that roof. You saw the urgency in which they had to respond. And 2 people have been commended for the actions they took that night, one of which is the individual you heard with his rather broad accent asking people, right, you lot, off the roof. A great vernacular which works well in those circumstances, but our teams know each other well and we kept each other safe. So I am hugely proud of my teams for what they did over that period. A number of commanders in this room, including myself, took command of the incident at some point over those 4 days to try and bring this conflagration to an end. It was deeply frustrating and deeply exhausting for our partners and our crews, and I couldn't extend my thanks to them enough. So thank you. Willing to take questions, which I'm sure Shantha or I could handle.
Thank you, Chief, for that. So I've got Councillor Price first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I also thank Shantha for an excellent presentation of what the field must have been like at that particular incident, and to also agree with your words about congratulations to all the staff and everybody who took part in it. My question to Shantha is that in light, and she heard what I said at the beginning of this meeting about the NFCCC looking at planning and not wanting planning authorities to be a statutory planning consultee, the fire service to be a statutory consultee, and I think having seen that and the comments that she made, I think goes against what the NFCCC has been looking at. Therefore, are the comments and the experiences and the knowledge which has come out of this going to be passed on to the NFCCC?
I'd support your comment there, and we know locally we've had issues in Southampton, have we not, with which Sharon has been involved in. Yes, did you want to comment?
Let me pick that up. Let me pick that up. Only in light of NFCC, and I know Councillor Price will understand the sensitivities around NFCC positioning. The positioning really comes from resourcing, in as much as even regulating the stuff, the buildings that we need to regulate. We've heard a great deal from the HMI nationally about us having to make sure we've got the appropriate resources to regulate. But in a way, this building wasn't about regulation. It was about, it wasn't about fire service regulation, because that was about risk assessment. This is about building design upstream. Now, building regulations are there to stop this happening. And without wanting to discuss the details of this building, which will be subject to further reviews, but the building itself is much larger than it would have ever been before under the old building regulations. because we took away a lot of the local acts. The Hampshire Act would have prevented this building being quite so big, and it would have been compartmented. So they're very different types of buildings than we used to have had in the past. So regulation's one thing, and what the regulation says is another, but then it's the enforcement of that regulation which becomes the upstream issue. So planning is one thing, and that will cause a whole deal of demand on fire and rescue services across the country. When you think about how many planning applications don't turn into actual buildings, and you think of the likes of London or as large cities like Birmingham, Manchester, and we would be hard enough hit and having to deal with those consultations. The bigger danger for us would be being sent a document that we didn't get around to looking at, which turned into be a dangerous building. That would be really the worst case scenario. We do have opportunities at building regulation stage. I'm not here to defend the NFCC position. I'm just saying I understand the position it's taken. It's one of resourcing and practicalities rather than idealism. And that's the point we can discuss further at some stage.
So Mr. Chairman, can I just comment on that very quickly and say I agree with Neil's last comment. We need to have a proper discussion about it at some point in the very near future.
Well, I mean, it was interesting that Shantha said that this was actually a building built within a building. I don't think I've heard that before. So, yeah, there's discussion to take place. Jonathan.
Well, first of all, I'd like to echo your comments about what a brilliant presentation that is. And it's not going to stay hidden in the Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service, I can tell you that. And secondly, can I also thank our Chief Fire Officer for re-emphasising the importance of the Scottish accent. No. This must be taken further outside of these walls. That's my feeling, and I quite agree with you about planning, but I also understand the number of planning applications come in just keep authorities dealing with their own planning applications up late at night. So there has to be a happy medium. And obviously we're talking about large buildings that are dependent on AI or robotics, built in this sort of way, which are inaccessible for humans and which are obviously, if they go on fire and are assessed, might become a major incident where the safety of the public becomes a major concern rather than just the building that's on fire. Therefore, like we had a subject, the discussion earlier about scrutiny, this needs to be shared, I would suggest, with county councillors and all over the county. I think they will be fascinated by this, and it'll get them thinking. I think it needs to be presented to Hyola, and that'll get the heads of the membership of Hyola asking questions about big buildings being set up, because they are the meeting point and the focus for local government, and what I call boroughs and districts. That might get the conversation going. I also think that certainly Hampshire County Council councillors would be interested in this, because there can't be anybody out there who wasn't aware of the Ocado fire. I imagine that Southampton and Portsmouth may think the same, but I'll let them make their own decisions on that. Okay, so that's certainly, I'd like to put those ideas forward. I know that you're going to be busy, Jonathan, with other things, but I would like to see that presentation being done at Hampshire County Council, just for one. That's enough for the moment.
I completely agree with your comment there, Jonathan, and I think that would be an excellent idea to brief everybody, not just at the county. I'm just going, it's not just big buildings. I'm going to invite Sharon to comment on the Southampton building, where nothing happened until your input.
I think you're referring to the student accommodation, where literally around the corner from St Mary's Fire Station, and I believe that the ventilation system wasn't sort of fit for purpose, shall we say, and there was also a kitchen right by the front door, and because the HFRS wasn't a consultee sort of early on in the planning process. It was actually Stu who had to sort of wait until the building had been finished before he could put a prohibition order on it. So, I mean, after that particular incident, which Stu told both myself and Councillor Coombs, who was on the fire authority with me, both of us sitting on the planning committee at Southampton City Council, we did actually arrange a meeting between Stu and our head of planning. So now, I don't think planning authorities want the fire and rescue service involved in every single planning application, but on the larger ones, you know, and I mean in Southampton we get quite a few large ones, predominantly purpose-built student accommodation because we've got 2 universities in the city. That means that, you know, there are conversations going on between the fire and rescue service and our planning department. So whilst I can understand Neil's point of view, or the NCC's point of view,
What you're telling us there, Sharon, is the risk is there, significant risk in Southampton.
Yeah. Can I also add, I thought the presentation from Shantha was brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. And I'm assuming it's going to be on the website.
It'll be published with the minutes. So it's been broadcast, it'll be published with the minutes.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. Shanta, thank you so much. It was really brilliant. Thank you. But can I just take you back to Ocado's actions? And from a professional point of view, if they hadn't switched off the sprinklers, A, would the fire have been contained, or would the sprinklers sufficient to have put the fire out before it developed?
So the sprinklers were permeated throughout the building. I can't give a straight answer on that, because I think that what we've explored previously is that was definitely one of the contributory factors to what turned from a small fire, effectively a candle on a birthday cake, to something deep-seated and inaccessible and growing in scale. They had invested in the sprinkler system, and obviously it's been specified by the insurers, so it's a critical part of their defence against the risk of fire.
Shantha's absolutely right. The thing to remember, in the brackets in Shantha's presentation, sprinkler was described as a life system, so it was there to protect life. The insurers would have specified it to try and protect the building also, but very clearly in our report, during building regulation consultation, was showing that we were concerns about the fire if it took hold in the centre of that racking, which inevitably it did. You know, it came to pass, sadly, that the fire was inaccessible by us by that stage, and therefore by the sprinkler as it was turned back on again. That's the fact. So the fire, once below plastic trays, is going to be really hard to get at, to put out, or to even hold in check by a sprinkler system.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've been talking about planning, but this, of course, I think this was on its 3rd or 4th incarnation as a building, and that wouldn't have come to planning anyway. But you'd be looking at building regulations, and I think we ought to be sending this to architects and designers, so they're the ones. Somebody will have designed this building, and that designer probably thought, oh, we'll put sprinklers in, without thinking about what's going to happen if, what if, and they're the ones we really need to get at. I'll spare your blushes by saying, yeah, I agree with the others, how brilliant it was, but we really need to get it out that when building use changes, if it's a significant change within that building, then the designers and architects need to think fire. How are they going to prevent it when it happens? If they're going to design, and I would guess we're going to get more and more buildings that are fully automated, if they're going to have buildings like that, what are they going to do when a fire breaks out? Are they going to make it so that firefighters can actually get in, or are they going to hope their completely automated firefighting systems will work? In this case, they didn't.
So, just to respond to that point, I think you're absolutely right, and the team have worked with the Building Research Establishment, which is commissioned by MHCLG to look at significant fires and consider building regulations, consider whether regulations are correct or whether there's a pattern building. So we've made sure that our thoughts are being shared with them. But equally, as I said earlier, the upstream challenges of our consultation, as in building regulations consultation, which is statutory, and the point was made about the student accommodation, our comments don't have to be adhered to until the building is occupied. That's the way the law works. Hence, sometimes we have to take action when it's occupied. The way it works is we make sure we notify them very clearly. We require this. If it's not done, we may take action once it's occupied. That's always been the case right back to the old 71 Act. It's always been a case in the way the fire service has worked. But we want to be open and upfront with developers saying, it's your risk, but we will take action if you don't take heed of what we are saying at that stage. So you will always have buildings built in a certain way, and we will always try to work with developers and with architects and with the approved inspectors to understand the use of the building, but sometimes we have to take action which we could be appealed against, of course. We take action on your behalf as the fire authority, make sure the buildings are compliant and safe. But that system sometimes breaks down. In this instance, you don't recognise building fault until it's too late. And that's the issue we want to try and build into building regulations inspections in the future. Yes, absolutely, we have, and indeed the whole country. So there's a similar Ocado building in Erith, and so we've worked with Kent and London Fire Brigade to share our learning with them, so that they are well cited on lessons learned here, as Ocado have as well. Clearly, it's not in their interest to lose another building like this, and I know they've taken quite broad considerations of other units they're building here and around the world. So, and praise to them, they've been a really, really helpful partner, and they're keen to get it right as well. So.
This building has sort of been used sort of for warehousing, etc. before, but to my way of thinking, it's quite a significant change of use because of the change in sort of the design of the building, sort of having a building within a building. Now, if there's a significant change of use, planning has to be involved, I mean, it's a statutory thing, a change of use, so from an office to retail, for instance, or has to have planning permission. So the Fire and Rescue Service could potentially get involved if it is recognised as a significant change of use.
Yeah, I'm no planning expert, but yeah, as it's been said, the use class probably wouldn't have changed in that building. But take your point, there's a significant change of risk, but not necessarily change of use.
Well, I think that's something that we need to carry forward and make further inquiry, don't we? So, any more points, any other questions, comments, members? Oh, I just want to add, well, thank you, Jonathan, for taking me to the recommendation on page 16. I think I want to sort of add a bit to just merely noting this. Yes, yes. I think, well, can I first ask you, Shan, where are we going now with this report? Is anything else going to come back to us, or?
So following my presentation at the ESS, there was a representative of Ocado there. So they're very keen to have myself or a member of my team speak to their executive team and indeed the next layer down to kind of spread our learning and continue their own investigations, as I mentioned in the presentation, in terms of research and development. In terms of the sector, there are mechanisms, sort of national operational guidance and learning to make sure that the strategic lessons are sort of fed back through the sector. And there are a whole host of internal learning points, which, as I mentioned, I'll be sort of tracking through my own mechanisms and the assurance framework we have, operational assurance framework we have within the organisation, to make sure that all of that learning, all of that experience is capitalised on, and we benefit from that.
Right. So you can bring a further report back to us then in due course as to how that is transpiring, the learning. I think that would be very useful for us to know that. So members, I think we should add to this recommendation here I'm sure you'll agree. I mean, we're noting the report. I think we should be saying that we look forward to hearing development. No, that's not the right wording. Help me here. What should we say? Look forward to further progress or
Report on national learning.
all right, that's the word. We look forward to receiving a report on national learning. I'd also like to say here that the authority acknowledges and congratulates the Hampshire Fire Service and indeed all other fire services and partners in their professional commitment in dealing with this incident. Are you happy with that?
I'm happy with what you're saying, but the reason for bringing this up is
Yes, yeah, I've been making a note. Would it be a bit more succinct to say that we'll delegate to the Chief Fire Officer in terms of like disseminating the learnings? And then also the presentation will appear on the web link as well, so we'll have that to circulate.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I'm not switched on here. And that does actually, I mean, that was, Shantha mentioned the fact that, you know, there were other significant fires taking place at that time. And we've had one or two just recently, some in Southampton and elsewhere. And, you know, it's an opportunity for me again to sort of acknowledge the professional commitment of our fire service across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. Right, are we all content with item 7 then? Well, not content, but we're all happy that we've covered that in some detail there, and we've had a lengthy discussion, and that indeed was very appropriate. So, moving on now then to agenda item 8, the Integrated Risk Management Plan Consultation Document. And you have a lengthy document before you. The report is on page 17. It's Stu? You're present. Yeah, okay, right.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, it's that time again where we start to consider our next planning cycle. As you may recall, the framework document is clear that the Fire Authority must have an integrated risk management plan. So our plan tends to stretch from 3 to 5 years, this current phase we're in now is trying to put that plan together. So what you have before you is not the plan, it is the arrangement to consult with our community in order to form the plan. And unlike anyone before, this particular consultation is really about the fundamentally high issues which may interest our communities. So what may have happened in the past was we plan to do X, Y, and Z. What do you think about that type of consultation? This is not one of those consultations. This is talking about the high-level aspirations of the authority, or our interpretation of those at this stage. It's also about what the community considers to be important, appropriate, a priority, so we can start to capture those thoughts in our consultation. So we're able to bring back to you in the turn of the year a new plan for the for the future 5 years to start shaping the delivery of the improvements across Hampshire and Isle of Wight, and indeed in lieu of a new combined fire authority, assuming that is to go ahead. What is unusual, I guess, about this one, if that is the only one I'm aware of that's ever happened in this way, is the fact it is a joint or proposed joint IRMP with Hampshire Fire Authority as it stands and the Isle of Wight Council as a fire authority, because as you are very familiar with, we are looking to combine those two authorities to create a new one. So by the time we get to the point where we enact a consulted on plan in April 2020, we certainly hope to be at shadow authority at that stage also. So it would look odd, would it not, to have two separate plans at that stage, should we get there and it be approved to go to shadow. So whilst I appreciate that this is a bit unusual, we have tried to draft the consultation and will continue to draft the plan in a way that allows the two authorities to exist in isolation, but also allows to exist in unity at some point in the future. The Isle of Wight Council also had this proposal put to them some 2 weeks ago, I'm looking at Kev, and it was approved there to go forward. So clearly that doesn't necessarily influence your own decision, but one of the recommendations is about proceeding in a joint way to consultation on the IRMP. So attached, and I'll come back to the recommendations, but attached in the documentation is an extensive analysis of the current situation. And as you can imagine, and as you're probably pleased about, I'm not going to talk you through the entire documents because they're quite large. And I wouldn't blame you if you hadn't managed to read all the details of that. But hopefully you've seen enough to see that, as ever, our teams, and thank you to Kev Evenet, who's here today, have done a great job in analysing our current situation across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, look at risk factors, look at issues that may arise to risk, and indeed what our plans could be to deal with those. So the point of this consultation really is to check that we haven't missed anything. So any groups or parties out there in our communities might say, well, what about this issue? You haven't really considered that in your thinking. It gives us an opportunity to add that to our thinking before we create the final plan. It also allows us to survey people about their thoughts and aspirations about some of our priorities, about the things which seem important right now, which we have discussed before. And it allows us in time to come back over that 8-week period to say, here's what our communities say. This is not a controversial document, and as a result, you've seen these in the past. I'm not anticipating, albeit I hope there will be, I'm not anticipating masses of public engagement in this. We'll do our best to increase that and make sure it's maximised. And as ever, we're working with the Consultation Institute and others to make sure we do a thorough job of this work. Because, one, we want to avoid any kind of legal challenge around our process, but more importantly, actually, we want to make sure we have worked as hard as we possibly can to bring in the community's views to help you shape your plan for the future. So again, I'm grateful to the team for being very thorough about the planning process, about the way we intend to engage with our staff and indeed the community. So I just wanted to quickly pop to the consultations. I'm looking at page 23 and the methodology which we intend to use. And in there, it describes some of the issues about the governance I've already described in terms of a joint approach. But in particular, the timelines. So we intend to go to consultation, should you agree today, with this document at the end of this month for the 8-week cycle. And then that gives us time to come back, consider what we've heard, with the Consultation Institute halfway through that to make sure we are being thorough and appropriate with that information, and again a check at the end. So the resultant recommendations we make to you for the plan, you will hopefully have confidence that we've had third parties check through this process. The consultation has been run by another third party who understand and safely use the opinions of our community by random selection, by group work, by other methods, by questionnaires, so that they can give you an objective assessment about what we have heard and not just our interpretation as officers of the authority. So that you receive, like we did some years ago with risk review, you receive an objective opinion about how we should proceed into the future. I'm not chasing awards here from the Institute of Consultation, but in the past we have received an award for the thoroughness of our approach, and I look forward to their support and accreditation in the way we do this. All the way through my team, I know we are very, very sincere about wanting to hear the views of our community. So as members, you clearly have a role in that. If you can encourage people to take part, encourage your constituents and your constituent authorities to take a view and be involved in that journey. As I said, nothing in here is going to suddenly be in the Sunday Times, I don't think, or in any papers, but one never knows. But we intend to actually ask the big questions, such as to what extent do you believe that your fire authority should be inclusive and represent its community? Of course, we expect to know what the answer may be, but we do not have, I never asked that question of our community. So we're asking questions like that in the attached questionnaire. So hopefully that gives you the sense of our intended planning. And there's lots more to go through, but I won't. And the glossy there really is not your integrated risk management plan. It is the consultation document explaining to the community how this works, what we want to know for what their views are, and some of the things we're starting to consider to put to you as an authority to be your plan in the future. So clearly, recommendations are important, but perhaps I'll take questions before Chairman takes us back to the recommendations. And Kevin is also here to help me answer those questions should they be too difficult for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Chief Officer. This, of course, comes at a very critical time. We've got the results of the first round of inspections will come out at the end of this year. This our IRMP is due to go live on the 1st of April next year, and we will know by then when our next inspection is going to be, I'm sure, and it may well be in April and May next year. So this is such an important document going forward, and the consultation is important, and we need to publicise that. So we have, Roger, I think you're the first one.
Thanks, Chairman. First of all, is that I understand the reasoning to have a joint plan between the Isle of Wight and Hampshire, and I agree with it reluctantly, because I think Hampshire should be standing on its own until it becomes a combined authority. Are there any others, and it's a question to you, are there any other issues which are affecting Hampshire which we're now in limbo over because we haven't been able to get the combined authority up and running as we would have expected it to be, which is causing us not to do things or to put things on the back burner or whatever because of this? That's the first thing. I would then like to go back to the actual document itself.
So, direct answer to your question, no. And actually, if anything, it's created a bit of more space for us to actually, get more detail around some of the things that have to happen eventually anyway. So it allows us to get ahead of that. What I would say though is if we had two distinct documents, because they both need renewing, we cannot be without an IRMP, because almost certainly the Emergency Inspectorate would say, well, you're falling foul of the framework document, you're not compliant, an easy criticism out of non-compliance. So as your Chief Officer, I'd never want to be without an integrated risk management plan. So if we went forward with just individual IRMPs, at the point of combination in 2021, assuming that goes ahead as we plan, we'd have to write a new IRMP. So we'd have an IRMP of 1 year and then write another one for the next 5 years. So it just seems that that's quite a big waste of resourcing, particularly at this level at the moment, because it's a very, very high level consultation around strategic issues. When you get into the delivery plans, I absolutely accept that those are much more specific to service. but the delivery plans come off the back of the RMP. Now, what you asked me to go do, I then put together an annual delivery plan about how I'm going to do that thing this year, and that may be different from the Isle of Wight than it is here this coming year. That's the point.
The other point, Mr. Chairman, is that at the Fire Commission on Friday, is that, I can't think of her name now, the chief from Kent made the comment that in Kent they've gone away from integrated risk management plan, or the name for it, and I was talking to Ros earlier on, and neither of us can remember what they're now going to call it. They're calling it something different because it had more of a connection to the public of thinking or knowing what it really is. Because if you went out and asked the public, what is an integrated risk management plan for Hampshire, what does it mean? They probably wouldn't really know. That's the first point. The second point is the document. I have to say, I struggle in trying to read this very grey, light grey print. Now, whether it's me, whether it's my eyesight or not, I don't know, whether it affects others, but I do find it not very easy reading. And I would just say, can you consider whether that is the right print before it actually is finally printed?
If I may, Chairman. So, yeah, and I think that they're two really useful points, and we'll consider the fonts. And as ever, we put it through our team for the inclusivity of such a document, make sure that we're printing in different languages and accessible from our community.
It's not the font, it's the colour.
No, sure, font and colour, and certainly for those of us who struggle with our eyesight, all of us now probably now, that can be a challenge. We get that. So, but the point about the name of it, certainly, I don't know if the deputy chief was here, and this is his lead. He's he want me to mention he's in New York, having a nice time, I'm sure, but he is keen on re-emphasising towards a safety plan, which is probably what Kent are using. It is a growing kind of theme that people are starting to call it what it is, which is a safety plan. Our plans to make Hampshire and Isle of Wight safer, and so, as you say, IRMP doesn't really run off the tongue. It's a very fire service or framework document, legalistic view. So it is likely that will, or the proposal to you will be, it will change, and so it's nice to hear that you've got that view as it stands.
I'd certainly agree with that. I mean, when you get to page 63, it seems to go into bold print, but before that, it's somewhat difficult to follow. So, if we're circulating this around, I think it needs to be one print right through, because I'd agree entirely. It's not easy to follow. Where are we going to now, Vice Chairman? Who's the next one? David. Oh, were you? Who was first here?
Well, mine.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I think Jonathan was first. Sorry.
Forgive me wrong. I think I'm still the champion of this. Is that right? Because
yes.
I'd like to
yes.
lead up. The influence of Andy Bowers, of course, is still here, which is great. I had several meetings with him before he retired, and I've had at least 2 meetings with Steve Apter, who took over the position that Andy had in terms of, let's say, getting some consultation, some discussion from the councillor point of view into the IRMP, and I look forward to the outcome of the consultation in mid-November, and I look forward, I presume I've got it right, to the publishing of this in February 2020, and I highly commend it.
Good. Thank you. Right. Now it's you, David.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's fairly minor. It's on page 114. It's got underneath, you've got a list going down to 12, the potential impacts in March 2019. Perhaps we could have somebody go through and make sure we're not talking about the future on past events. So that one in particular I picked up. There may be others, I don't know. But, if it goes out to the public, somebody's going to pick it up and say, what's going on? Page 114, page 39 of the document, 114 of the agenda. And if you see, you've got a list there, and then the very first sentence at the bottom after the list, the potential impacts of the United Kingdom. But it talks about March 29 as being in the future. And it quite clearly isn't.
Thank you. We'll pick that up.
As I said, it's a minor point, but...
Yeah, but it's valid. The point is, he's read it, Chairman.
It's not lost on me that he's demonstrating his readiness. What Roger said about the title, I think that's valid, because integrated risk management plan, does that mean, what does that mean to people? Whatever Kent are doing is going to probably be the same document, but they're calling it something simpler so people can understand what it's. Can I just ask, when we send this out, is there a covering paper that explains exactly what we're expecting, what's expected of the people? And there are an awful lot of pages here. Really, there should be an executive summary so they understand what it's about, which would then could explain what integrated risk management plan actually means.
Sure. I'll pass to Kev. I know there's a common plan for this, so I'll pass to Kev to do that.
So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As people have said, integrated risk management plan is not a phrase that is understood widely by the public. And a number of fire and rescue services, such as Kent and London, have renamed them a safety plan. This plan that we have in front of us today is the consultation document, not the finalised product that will come out of the consultation. That will be it's an our gift, what we call it, but it will have a full explanation of the outline of the plan and the purpose of it within that, so our public understand exactly what the document is referring to.
Right. Okay, thank you for that, Kevin. I think integrated risk management plan is an internal terminology for the fire service. I would interpret it as that. So I think what we're seeking is a means of everybody else understanding what we're trying to achieve there. So from what you've told me, that will be the intention then.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, good, thank you.
If I may, Chairman, I'll just add one small point. And you know, as you'd imagine, the team is now planning to how you present this for greatest accessibility. But there is a kind of small and rather boring compliance point about we have to consult, we have to have an integrated risk management plan. That's what the framework document says. So in a way, what we're doing, exercising here, is the fire authority saying we are going to consult on our integrated risk management plan. What we end up calling that plan down the track is entirely your gift, and if you'd like to do that, we'll certainly amend that to what your wish is. But what we're demonstrating here is we have a thing we are consulting on, which is called currently our integrated risk management plan, so we're compliant. So it's a bit of a dull point, but nonetheless it's important at this stage. We'll make sure it's accessible and people understand what we're asking for maximum return on our consultation.
And so can we just check on the date when this consultation starts? It's on page 27. It's in November, isn't it? No, it ends in November. This next week. Okay. Right. Okay. Can we go to the recommendations, which are page 21? Are you content with those recommendations? Agreed? Good. Thank you very much. So now we move to page 127 on your agenda, item 9, Health and Safety Annual Report 2018-2019. Who is right? Thank you.
This is what happens when your deputy go on holiday. Health and Safety Annual Report, members. So again, as the title would suggest, every year we report to you on our progress. One of the, as I said earlier, one of the fundamentally most important things that we must do as an employer, but equally in our occupation, which is a relatively dangerous occupation, our staff safety is a primary concern of ours. So the Health and Safety Report is an important part of your oversight to ensure that we are doing what we can to keep our staff as safe as possible. So the paper speaks for itself. It's a high-level paper, and I know already, having spoken to some members, there's a need or a wish for further granularity, which I know the Deputy Chief is keen to bring to you in the future. But at this stage, we are in a cycle of planning, which is coming to an end this calendar year. So in the recommendations, it suggests, or it recommends that you ask me to review our approach to some of this, as well as the, sorry, actually, no, that's the next paper. But I know the Deputy Chief is keen to review the approach to health and safety in his future plan, so you get more granularity, which he already sees and satisfies himself. But it's important that you can read these papers and be satisfied that we are taking care of our workforce as best we can. So in essence, the highlight is on paragraph 19, which is the start of page 130, which is that table, which gives you some sense of trend. So whilst we do monitor all the causes of these incidents and the themes that come out of what's leading to injury, and in a root and branch way, and they're very thoroughly done, there are a couple of trends which are worth just pointing out. So the overall number of total recorded events looks pretty frightening and pretty dramatic. It's gone from 163 in 2016 to 230 in 2019, which looks like it's a bad indicator. But what we're adding to that, and it makes up the total number, is the near miss and cause for concern. And I think we've described it before. That's a really important leading indicator, in as much as we want that to go up. We want that to be maximised, where people are saying something could have caused an incident which hurt somebody, or it was something which I'm worried about may in time hurt somebody. We encourage our staff to report it quickly so that we can have it remedied before it does hurt somebody. Then we try to understand how it ever got to be in that position. And that could be from a split tyre to a spanner that's been held at a high level which could have fallen on someone, all sorts of things like that. Right through to what we saw at Ocado, where rapid evacuation of staff because of an unexpected fire growth. So a near hit like that, near miss, is really important that we start to understand not what hurt our firefighters, but what could have hurt our firefighters and all of our staff to make sure we're good at it. And you'll see the bit at the bottom there, the near miss and cause for concern, has raised quite incredibly from 2016 to 2019. And more than doubled. So I'm very encouraged by that. Now, clearly, we'd love a workplace where they never spot any issues and it's always nice and safe. But this is a really important part of our maturity as an organisation in being a learning and safety-conscious organisation that we encourage people to report. So whilst the injuries, the total injuries, have about plateaued over that time, there's been a dip in the previous years, but 114 against 112 is around a flat line. So we don't rest on our laurels there. We have got more work to do to try and get that number going down again, as it has done in the intervening years, but you'll see not by dramatic amounts. So we do work in an occupation which has its hazards. We train in real time. We train in hazardous situations. We try to mitigate and minimise the risk to our people. But it's one of those industries which we accept that there's always going to be some injury to our firefighters, our teams doing what they do. Some are unacceptable and we would not tolerate them and will drive them out. Others are unnecessary, perhaps part of our experience, and we hope that the impact on our people isn't as serious as it could be. So that's where we stand on our trends, and I know if I just read this report I'd want to know more, and I'm sure you do, but I make the point again that we can support you further with more granular data in the future, which will be an appendix to this in the future reports. But at this stage it's supposed to be a high level indication of where we're going. And when the Deputy returns, he'll certainly be able to answer more questions, either on APAG or in terms of a public forum, to give you some more granular details, but today I won't have those necessarily to hand. I welcome questions in the meantime, though. Thank you.
Right, thank you for that. I think it gives us confidence that the firefighters are now able to feel able to report near misses, whereas perhaps in the past they wouldn't have done so. So I think that is an encouraging trend. Questions, members? Yes.
Chairman, can I just ask the Chief, I'm trying to sort of, on this chart, look at adding the numbers up. And if you take the first three under the total recorded, they don't add up to the top line. I don't think in any of the instances. Now, to me, the total recorded incidents are really the total of the three below it. I accept it doesn't include the last one, and I'm just wondering where the numbers, why they're differing.
So total injuries and near miss and cause for concern, those are the two that are added up. So if you like, the lost time injury, they're all part of total injuries. So I accept what you're saying, it's a bit confusing. So if you like, on the 19 line, the 50 and the 62 add up to make 112. But if you take 112 and 118, that adds up to 230. Yeah.
It's total injuries and near
Yeah. I'm impressed myself. I managed to pull that one out of the bag, but you know, and so is the treasurer, by the way. But the point is not lost. It's not an easy graph to follow. But as you imagine, when you go below this, it gets even more confusing. So trying to pull the facts and useful stuff out of the data is hard work in health and safety.
Right, you got the answer to that then. Any other comments? No. Right. Okay. Well, as you said, Chief Officer, there will be a further report from your deputy in due course. So can I take you to the recommendation then on page 131 that we note this annual health and safety report? All agreed? Good. Thank you. Moving on then to agenda item 10. This is the strategic risk register. Kevin, are you? Oh, it's not Kevin. It says Kevin here. Yeah. Right. Okay.
Once again, sorry. So this is the one that, again, the Deputy Chief is keen to review. So in essence, the future will be that when your new integrated risk management plan, or whatever we choose to call it, safety plan, is agreed, that is, if you like, the risk register for the community risk. That will be the register that says, here's the things in our community that may cause harm and death and injury, and this is what we intend to do about it. There will also be a corporate risk register, which is the list for you to consider. What are the things that will stop us achieving those mitigations? That will be the future, and so the recommendation contained below is that you ask me to lead the team in bringing back that approach. As it stands, though, our approach historically has not been that case. And so if I can take you to the appendix in the first instance, the strategic risk register is a mix of the things in our community which are risky and the things in our organisation that may also risk our delivery against mitigations. So it's a mixture of those two things, which we have found over the last few years has been slightly confusing and unhelpful in shaping our actions and mitigations and monitoring them really appropriately. So whilst we ask you to approve the refresh of this particular method of analysing corporate risk and strategic risk, at the same time I'm asking you to agree to a refreshed way of doing it, which will come back to you in the new year, so that we can move forward in a better way. So in essence, the risks that currently exist, the two which are the highest, which aren't particularly high, they are possible and moderate, if you like, in terms of impact, are financial risk, our ability to meet our services budget, which you'll know about the ongoing financial constraints, and essentially the failure to deliver an efficient, effective service. That's around crewing and our arrangements of making sure our fire engines are crewed, as well as running our daily service. Those are the highest risks, but as I say, they're an amber 6, so they're not particularly high because we have mitigations in place, as you've seen, to manage those risks. So I'm confident that this is a fair reflection, as are my team, of our current corporate situation. I would like it to be simpler in the future, so they're able to track through those two issues, one being community and the other being organisational risk. So happy to take questions on that basis before the Chairman takes us to recommendations.
Can I first, referring back to the meeting that I went to just recently with the inspection team, they were, one of the comments they made was about sharing good practice with others. And can I just ask how this can, I mean, clearly this will be part of the inspection going forward, and it is changing. So how does this compare with others?
That's partly the benefit of having a diverse senior director team. The Deputy Chief coming in from London has seen numbers of different ways of doing it across the country, and has been able to bring to us a different challenge to why do we do it this way? Is there a different way of doing it? So this year's, this cycle's integrated risk management plan, as well as the corporate risk methodology, is something he wants to change. So it's a matter of obeying with what we do now through to the point where the planning cycle allows us to change. So it's a great example of new people in the team, a diverse bunch of people come from different backgrounds, can bring different views and different vantage points, and we definitely benefit from the experience of those team members from across the country.
Well, thank you. That's indeed very useful to know. Members, any comments?
A brief comment, Mr. Chairman, that Matt's dealing with governance risk. I'm sure that
You're demonstrating to us you've read the document again. Yes, well done. Yes. Which page are you on?
Just to confirm, that is policy governance.
Yes, right. We'll take the recommendations then on page 135. Are you content with those? Agreed. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Right, we're moving on now to agenda item 11, page 139 of your agenda. Appointment to Hampshire Firefighters Pension Board. And this is Paul.
Thank you,
Welcome,
Chairman.
Paul.
Thank you. Very short report, members, just to deal with appointment to the vacancy on the Firefighter Pension Board. One thing to note, you've probably all spotted, there is a reference to the exempt appendix later in the pack, which contains the identity of the candidate, which we do need to keep confidential until after the appointment's been made and confirmed with the individual. So hopefully all self-explanatory. As long as members don't wish to debate this in a way that identifies the individual, you could deal with the recommendation now if you're happy to.
Strong recommendation.
Yes, yes. Are you all content with that? Right, so we're agreeing with the recommendation on page 140. Do you want me to read it out? It's recommended that the authority appoint the applicant listed in the exempt appendix, which we will consider later, to the vacant scheme member position on the Hampshire Firefighters Pension Board. All happy? Agree?
Happy becoming a member of the committee.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Thank you. Right. Right. Okay, now we move on to item 12. And this is the minutes of the stakeholder committee that was held on the 16th of July. And I hand over to the chairman of that committee, Councillor Price.
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleasure in presenting the first set of minutes of the committee, and I'm quite happy to answer any questions which may be contained in there. But I suspect if anybody wants to ask any questions, it's going to come in the meat of the item, which is we will be dealing with later.
Yep. Yep. That's fine. Oh no, because I don't have a recommendation because these are minutes. Yes. So we take those minutes. Right. So now we.
Chairman, there is a recommendation to the full authority in the minutes at.
Is there?
Yes, and
thank
it's
you,
at
Paul.
page 142.
There is.
So that probably does need to just be dealt with.
Yes. So thank you for reminding me of that, Paul. So page 142, 1 and 2 are resolved, but number 3, that it be recommended to the full authority that terms of reference be approved and included in the Constitution. This is the terms of reference for the stakeholder committee. Yes. They are attached as an appendix. Are you all content with that? Yeah. Okay. So we've approved that. Right. So now we move on to agenda item 13. And I look to the Chairman of Standards and Governance, please, Councillor Fairhurst, to present the minutes of the meeting of Standards and Governance on the 23rd of July.
Thank you, Chairman, but actually I'm going to hand over to my Vice Chairman because unfortunately I was unable to be at the meeting, so Councillor Minter.
Oh, you were apologies, yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm pleased to present the minutes of the Standards and Governance Committee held on the 23rd of July, which I unexpectedly ended up chairing. Happy to take any questions.
Everybody content? They would resolve matters on that occasion. Everybody happy with that? Right, thank you. So we now move to item 14, and I will read it out. Exclusion of the press and public, to resolve that the public be excluded from the meeting during the following items of business, as it is likely, in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings, that if members of the public were present during these items, there will be a disclosure to them of exempt information within paragraph 3 of part 1 of the Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, and further that in all the circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information for the reasons set out in the reports. Right. Great.